welcome to another fireside chat with the National Security Space Institute. Today, myself and Major Cam Cunningham are going to be talking with AM Godfrey. Sir, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you here, sir.
Yeah, look at that, 2 Brits on a fireside chat about national security space.
Slightly outnumbered, America, just saying.
I'm honored to be here.
Sir, can you start us off by giving a brief summary of the role that you are currently undertaking and how you came into space? Because for us Brits and coalition partners, it's slightly different compared to Guardians.
Well, it's a good question, right? Why is a Brit with a set of wings on sat here? So I've been in the Air Force 34 years now, the Royal Air Force. Flew for about 30 years of those. And as I came to the end of my flying time, I will always say I'd rather be lucky than good. But I was coming to the end. I was the Cadet Director at Al Udeid, and I got a phone call from the UK of, would you be interested in running to become the commander of UK Space Command? So I immediately said yes. And again, more by luck than judgment, I think. I ended up getting the job. That was at the beginning of 2021. So I spent the last sort of 3.5 years standing up UK Space Command, which I was incredibly proud of. A joint organisation, sits underneath the Royal Air Force, but doing space for the whole of defence. Back in the United Kingdom, we were from 6 to 600 people in 3.5 years, which is why it's really good for me to have done that, because kind of that's the way that Space Force has been growing, and some of the elements of Space Force have been growing. How did I come into my current role, which is the Assistant Chief of Space Operations, which essentially means I'm working for General Saltzman in the headquarters staff for future concepts and partnerships. And that was, I think, comes from optimizing for great power competition. That from Secretary of the Air Force through to the services, and certainly with General Saltzman, it was, all right, how do we bring allies and partners in at the highest level? And so I was incredibly fortunate to be the guy that happened to be finishing at around the time that they were wanting, a general equivalent to be able to come into the space staff. I don't think any of us thought it was going to happen. However, some incredible work by people back in the Pentagon and beyond actually meant that I was able to start in June of this year. And I'll pause in a minute so you can drag some other questions out of me on this. But it is ultimately about exactly what it says on the tin. What are the future concepts, futures command? How's that going to bring allies and partners into this? And how do we make sure that we are embedded right from the beginning with allies and partners, so that we're not playing a pickup game, to use an American phrase, later on, down the road. Because if we can do it now, it stops us having to do it when we are in crisis or in conflict.
Sir, so would I be correct in saying we're the first service in the U.S. Department of Defense to bring on a close partner in this kind of a position?
He definitely took a risk. Yes. It's an enormous privilege to be in here at this level, 3-star equivalent as Air Marshal, and you're right. And so it's not your normal exchange officer, because if and this is the reason I think that General Saltzman did it, because if you want allies to have access, then rolling a 3-star into a conversation in the Pentagon means that you have to have access. I think, early on, it was funny where I'd walk into a room and people are now panicking about, what actually can they say? It's a much more normalized conversation. I do have to say as well that I'm not doing this as a Brit. We joked at the beginning, there's a couple of Brits in the room here, but I'm doing it as an ally. So it is for all the allies out there to just try and, as I say, embed allied thinking right from the very beginning. And that works. Even just sitting in a meeting, people will see me there, and that will nudge them to consider allies and partners, or the classification of the brief, or what are we going to talk about. So, even 3 months in, it's been eye-opening, and I think you'd have to ask General Saltzman. I think it's been useful. Yeah, I'll put in a good word.
There you go. We regularly talk about the power of the messaging, though, of having an allied partner working with the CSO and the Space Force, really, really harnessing the partnership aspect. And how do you see that shaping future warfare? And we talk about space warfare is and like how we're going to be successful as a coalition, but it's not just for space. It's actually warfare in a general sense, all domains. How do you think this begins to set us for success?
Yeah, but so there's an interesting point you make there about warfare and space, because certainly even, just about 4 years ago when we stood up Space Command, it's quite a jump that organizations have to take when you think space is a peaceful domain and a domain for all of mankind. It really is one of those things where suddenly you start talking about an operational domain. NATO declared it an operational domain in 2019, which is one of the reasons that then France, then the UK, Australia, it snowballed so that there are so many space commands out there. And I think all of us now, when you look up at the build-up of potential adversary capability, I think you have to start talking about it as a warfighting domain, which is a big step, and the stand-up of Space Force, I think, not whilst, space enables the joint force, you now cannot take it for granted. And I think being able to talk to allies and partners about how the Space Force is structured, the capability that Space Force has in order to protect and defend that capability so that the other services can continue to fight in their domains is really important. So, how do we embed that? I think there's a real opportunity with Futures Command as Futures develops the future architecture of the Space Force. Right from the very beginning, what is the Allied input into that? And what is the demand signal from a future force in 2030 or 2040 to the Allies? Because the US won't be able to do all of this alone. And there will be, I'm talking, the reason I'm doing this is because it's sort of a bar on the right-hand side of a graph that sort of grows. But where are if that's what we need and that's what the US can fund, you could call this risk. Actually, it's an opportunity for allies and partners to be able to develop capability. The issue that we have got is, I'm going to say, overclassification of space. But that's why I'm here. That's why, breaking down barriers, declassifying things. So actually we can understand the gaps and the allies can bring their capabilities to bear. The integration side of it, I know there's a long answer, but if we go back to my early days of flying aircraft, this is when data links were coming in. And there are a number of different protocols for data links that we all thought, they're going to speak to each other. Turns out we couldn't speak to each other, and it made it harder to fight as a coalition until we'd squared away the standards that we needed to get to. And I think that's a conversation right from the beginning as well. The interfaces, the standards, the protocols that you are using. You might go and buy different stuff, but as long as we are working together to understand those things, what in the past NATO STANEX, standardization agreements, if we get that right, then no matter what any of us bring to the party, you'll be able to fight as a coalition in the future, which in itself is a deterrent for Red to start anything in the first place.
Do you think there needs to be a cultural shift within Space Force? Because we talk so much about Space Force culture and how it's shaping. And when we look at our other services across, internationally, a lot of the culture is formed within fighting. It's rarely formed in the build-up to aggression. It's actually going into things and learning who you are as a service when you're under pressure and when you're up against it. So do you think there's also some kind of shift with culture that needs to actually really embrace or try to embrace working with allies and partners and capitalize on capabilities rather than it be like an augmentation piece and the challenges with classification before we get there? And do you have thoughts on how we really get after that? How can people at the ground level support that as well as people at yours?
You've set me up for a long answer again on this one as well. So the first part of it, I think the culture shifted as soon as US Space Force was formed almost 5 years ago. All of a sudden, we're back to the warfighting side of things as well. But there is a reason that an additional service has stood up, for the first time since, I guess, 1947, right? And so with that, there's a cultural shift when people start putting on blue name tabs and becoming guardians. The I think there is still a further cultural shift, which is why I've ended up in the job that I am, of bringing in allies and partners into what was previously a hugely classified domain. And I think that's the cultural shift that is currently happening as well. And then when you see just some of the work in progress within the Space Command of standing up Futures Command, for example, or the Space Forces generation, generating warfighting capability and sort of mirroring other services in the way that forces are presented to a combatant commander. I think all of this is actually, you'll be able to tell me better than I know because of the Guardians that come through the courses here, NSSI and obviously OTC, Officer Training Course that's happening at the moment. Whether you see that shift, but certainly the value of things like NSSI. I did the Space Executive course here with a whole mixture of different people in the room that saw the value of allies and partners. Whether you bring capability, whether you bring geography, whether you bring a different way of thinking, all of things are relevant. Good people is at the heart of it. And certainly, last week I've been out here in Colorado, certainly the visits I've even done today, people are trying to bring allies in right at the ground floor. So I think there has been a cultural shift. It won't happen overnight. So again, we've got a road ahead of us, but hopefully it's not even that we're a start of it. We're partially the way through it. There'll be a number of processes that we need to look at, declassification, again, those sorts of things. But I think we're there.
So I'd like to ask you on that note, as far as good people, developing good people, acquiring talent, and developing the right kind of talent. So you all both are, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but a qualified space instructor or weapons officer equivalents, essentially, on what the U.S. would have as a weapons officer. That's a very unique talent set. I'm an AFIT grad, so I have kind of the technical side of things. What's the right mix as far as education and training, do you think? Should it be more towards, there's always has been a debate with, and even when it was Air Force Space Command, should we be exclusively a STEM-focused, engineering-heavy talent, especially on the officer side, or should it be more, we should be planners? I think I know, if you forced me, I think I could tell you where the CSO's head's at. You probably know better than I, but what do you think's the right mix of education and training there, sir?
I think all of the above, right? That's why I really like the potential that Officer Training Course has as an example, where you are putting people through operations, cyber and intelligence training so that they get a mix of everything. We had a conversation at Corona last week about at what point, if you have an engineering background, do you look for the potential to do an advanced academic degree, as an example? Does the Guardian career structure allow you to get into engineering aspects, ultimately become a PEO? You're going to need a ton of people who have got that engineering background in order to be able to develop space programs, that technical background in the future. But I think, the way that again, the officer training, and we have discussed the enlisted cadre here as well in terms of the technical expertise they will require on their weapon systems and the training, it back to culture again. This will be an emerging culture, completely different. And this is a long-term thing as well. So you ask me, what is the mix? Ask me in 20 years' time, when the first lieutenants that are coming out of OTC are lieutenant colonels, and we've got an idea of how this came together. But I think where we're going right now with a sort of top up of everything to be able to then potentially specialize later on is a really good thing, because I've seen in my career so many people that might stovepipe up a certain point and become absolute experts in their field. Great, you need those people as well. But then when it comes to joint integration, you're probably missing something. So being able to talk space operations, being able to talk space intelligence, being able to talk space cyber operations, I think is an amazing baseline that allows you to speak to joint staff or anyone in any of the other warfighting domains as well.
Building on that, with space being inherently joint, how do we get Guardians that real exposure of understanding in other domains? So obviously we're talking about how we're tackling cyber and special operations, for example, but maritime, land and air. How do we get after giving them the true understanding of the opportunities and vulnerabilities that are linked to space that they can either educate other personnel on or mitigate?
In terms of, how do you get a better joint focus amongst the Guardians, I think it is a really good point. I brought that up at a Space Force Leadership Away Day, and actually, as always, they were ahead of me on this, because when we looked at the officer career structure, there was and that was the concentration on this particular away day. We've subsequently done the enlisted career structure as well. But getting people into the joint organizations is a priority because, one, it helps the other organization understand space. And I think all of us right now know that there isn't enough space understanding in the other services. Two, it allows Space Force to advocate for budget, for capabilities within the joint area. We're not doing space for space sake here. Space is, and it enables, well, I think anyone watching this absolutely understands it enables our way of life, let alone our way of joint warfighting as well. And those assets need to be protected and defended. And I guarantee if I stop someone in the corridor of the Pentagon right now, would they have a full understanding? Probably not. Would they have a light understanding? Maybe. Therefore, getting more Guardians into the joint force would be a good thing. Clearly, the issue we've got as being the smallest service is, can you afford to send those Guardians out into the joint arena and have enough to backfill within the service itself? So that was the conversation of, right, if you're starting with this many joint jobs that we want, what does that mean? What's the size of the force then have to look like? And we're talking senior enlisted in joint jobs as well. And at what point would you get, enlisted master sergeant potentially, going out into staff roles, those sorts of things? What size of force do you actually need when you think we're sat here with what, maybe, I think Cam, you might be able to tell me, about 15,000 Guardians in uniform and non-uniform as well. I think it is a really, really good point. And the other nations that I think struggle with the same thing as well. Certainly, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is CSPO, the Combined Space Operations Forum, as our primary coalition forum. Five Eyes plus France, Germany, Italy, Norway, and Japan, all who have recently stood up space commands or equivalents, and all who are trying to impress the importance of space on the joint staff, joint commands within their own organizations, within their own nations as well. So we'll get there in the end, but again, all of this is it's sort of a long game at the end. We just got to hope that nothing significant happens in the space domain in the short term, and we have to go with what we've got.
What do you think warfare looks like in the next 1 to 5 years, with the sort of rising tensions that we see in Europe with Russia invading Ukraine and that ongoing conflict, with the uncertainty, instability, and devastation that we see within Israel right now, and also with the concerns over Taiwan and the South China Sea? What kind of challenges do you think that we're likely to encounter in the short term, and what do we need to do to really prepare ourselves to be able to counter those challenges, and maybe even be sufficiently deterring? And I add a small part onto that because we have had some maybe changes into how we've done or how we're doing business within the education and training world, where we've almost become slightly less accessible to our international partners and allies. Some of the training opportunities have altered. What do we need to do to make sure that we're actually set for success going forwards, and not lose the pace that we were gathering perhaps maybe a year ago?
I tell you what, maybe I'll start this one with, I think it's really interesting, General Saltzman's theory of success of enduring competition, because that's where we are right now. And maybe, to start, how is warfighting different in that, previously you're not warfighting and you're warfighting, but now if we're enduring competition, not quite crossed the threshold into warfighting, but then still need to have the capabilities in order to, avoid operational surprise, deny first mover advantage. and conduct responsible space campaigning. I love those three tenets of that theory of success, because we're in it. We're in it right now. So you talk about where are we going in the future? We are here right now. I think, just observing what is happening around the world right now, if we talked about this with STARCOM, Space Training and Readiness Command today, of what is your lessons learned process? How does that get back out to the force again? We can learn a ton from everything that's going on in Ukraine. We talk about the first shot fired there was a cyber attack, ultimately through space on a communications network. The advent, if you like, of Starlink, bringing communications back to both the civil and the military population in there. The commercial ISR, Earth observation, is incredibly important in terms of augmentation and just seeing where they are going with tools, the use of AI and so on, to be able to see stuff that you'd have to put through analysts over a number of hours that you can now get in seconds. Warfighting is changing before our very eyes. And I was just reading yesterday in a newspaper about a particular division within the Ukrainian army that have changed from using first-person video drones to now become drone killers. So they were operating in the trenches, but now they're actually operating at altitude and looking at the sort of persistent ISR that Russia has got. This is a day-by-day basis that we're seeing developments in warfare. We need to keep on top of that. So again, what is your process for understanding that information, processing it, and then changing how we will fight, changing our techniques, our tactics, our techniques, our procedures? I think that's what we need to consider right now, because if we don't learn the lessons of what we're seeing, and also some of these lessons are very specific to these particular theaters, but just, you mentioned the Middle East, missile warning, missile track. When you get salvos of 200 missiles that we have not seen previously. We had salvos of over 100 missiles into Ukraine on that first night after that cyber shot. What does that mean? And we all know Space Force through SDA and working with other agencies as well is developing a resilient architecture for missile warning, missile track. I think we'll start to think that these things are really, really important. They always were in the Cold War, but we're back to the future now on that side of things. So warfare, there'll always be an element of warfare where you've got in Ukraine from cyber through to trench warfare from, that people have been doing for hundreds, if not thousands of years, all the way through to sort of space capability. I think the answer is study it, learn it, and then, change how you're going to do things if you need to in the future.
So on that learning note, I've heard you describe in the past that space education in general, and the NSSI in particular, is the front door to space. Now, could you tell us what you mean by that? Yeah,
I think it's simple. In my last job, the first course I went on was the Space Executive course at NSSI. It gave me a huge insight as previously a non-space person. I'm from another domain. I did get an insight as the CAC director out in Al Udeid. But firstly, what it taught me. Secondly, the people it introduced me to inside of that room and the sort of shared experiences and so on. I think any of the nations out there that are standing up space commands, the hardest thing is the education and the training of the individuals that come in, because we haven't got that broad base from that Air Force space that you guys had to bring into this. We have definitely got, I think, a lot of nations. There's a lot of space-specific people, but it's not a broad base. The only way you can create that broad base is through education and training, which is why I think, what were the numbers we heard today? There were 2019, there were something like 5 nations who would come on courses.
Including the US.
Including the US. And by last year, there were 52 different nations that had attended either virtually or in-person courses that NSSI run. I think that right there gives you everything you need to know about this being the front door. Educate your people and then they can start making their own decisions in their own nations as the sorts of structures that they need to put together, the sorts of capabilities that they could bring to the broader coalition. And as I say, even the smallest nations there, chances are you've got some geography and some different way of thinking that makes a coalition perfect for our way of warfare and deterrence at the end of the day.
Thank you, sir. And I wonder if I could ask one more education-related question. How do you see the role of digital education, especially what the NSSI is doing with its YouTube, its educational videos, speaker series like this that RAM and others have done? What role do you think that plays in even expanding out the reach of space education?
I think it's huge, because if you can self-start on some of these things in terms of making yourself a little bit smarter on what space is all about, I wished I'd found the YouTube channel a bit earlier when I was standing up UK Space Command. I think within 2 days of being told that I had the job, I was then on a 2,000 people dialing in for a virtual session, and me wondering what I was going to say. Sort of there you go, rabbit in the headlights at that particular point. To be able to go and find that information online at the unclassified level, I think is brilliant. I mean, whether it's useful or not, we'll wait and see what reviews we get of this particular one. 1-star review, maybe we need to redo it again.
Surely 3 stars.
Oh yeah, maybe potentially. Yeah, 3-star review. I'd be happy with that. I'd take a 1-star review.
Just hit the like and subscribe. And that's what
there you go.
That's what you
like. Right.
Of course, yes, sir.
But no, I think it's enormously useful, and it'd be great to get feedback from people in terms of the different people they see speak. And we don't want everyone to be saying the same thing as well. It's something we talked about today of, the anti-war fighters, if you like, in the space domain. You got to listen to both sides of an argument in order to make up your own mind. And so, the more that you can be diverse in this sort of series of discussions, podcasts, YouTubes, those sorts of things, I think the better.
The cognitive diversity, I think, really helps. Certainly, I know I enjoy seeing the cognitive diversity of getting the different perspectives, and I think it speaks a lot to how we do our courses and the audiences that we get, like in residence, for example, when we have like our coalition space course, having multitudes of different nations. It's the exposure that the individuals come with.
Yeah.
Like, you might be closer to a particular front than somebody else, and just sharing that perspective and that understanding is gold. So it's wonderful to have you participate in this, and we will continue to try to find diverse thought as we go through with more of this speaker series. It's been a pleasure having you here, and thank you very much for partaking.
Brilliant. No, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope I bring that into the Space Force on behalf of, all of the allies out there, as just a different way of thinking, especially as we sort of craft the international partnership strategy for the service as well. The fact that I'm in there, it's a brilliant start for 10. So really glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
We want to partner to win, sir, so thank you for taking the time.
There you go. Operationalizing partner to win. That's our strapline.
Yes, sir.
Love it. Thank you.